Okay, good evening. Welcome those that are joining us virtually. This is our planning public meeting for zoning bylaw amendment 98, 2025 additional residential units. It's Monday, September the 29th, 2025. This meeting will be streamed live and recorded for public viewing on the town's YouTube page. Council, I would remind you, if you have a pecuniary interest, to please declare it either now or at the appropriate time. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment will be presented to the council and to the public for input and feedback. These changes are being proposed in response to Ontario's Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act 2022, which requires municipalities to permit 2 additional residential units, ARUs, as of right on most residential property. In line with this provincial direction, a housekeeping amendment to the town's comprehensive zoning bylaw 97 of 2023 is required to specifically identify ARUs as a permitted use within the applicable zones. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce those that are joining us this evening on council and staff. First of all, our Deputy Mayor Nettie McEwen, Councillor John Van Clavern, Councillor Bob Wolvett, Councillor Christian Rodriguez, Councillor Mike Vasey, Councillor Alex Bojan, our CAO, Mr. Adam Sabansky, our clerk, Aaron Kawarchuk, our senior planner, Maria Casarasi, our planner, Jordan Wallace, Mr. Will Nyweening, planning coordinator from the county, and we have our fire chief, Mr. Will Davidson, with us, as well as our planning technician, Diane Gould Brown. Ms. Gould Brown, official notice, was it posted on the town's website on September the 8th, 2025? As well, was an additional notice advertised in the independent newspaper on September the 11th, 2025?
Yes, your worship.
You can confirm that.
I can confirm that.
Thank you. All right. Let's go to item 6.1. I have a motion by Councillor Wolvett, seconded by Councillor Van Clavern, that report prepared by Maria Casarasi, Senior Planner, dated September the 22nd, 2025, concerning the draft housekeeping amendment to the town zoning bylaw 97, 2003, related to additional residential units, be received, and staff be directed to bring forward an amending bylaw to council reflecting the recommendations contained in this report. So Ms. Casarasi, I'm going to now turn it over to you to give us your report that we can consider for the future.
Thank you, your worship. So as mentioned, the proposed changes are intended to not only bring the zoning bylaw into conformity with current provincial legislation related to additional residential units, but also to simplify the existing bylaw and introduce greater flexibility in support of additional residential unit development. Staff have reviewed the legislative changes, have looked at comparable zoning regulations from other municipalities and the town's current provisions for accessory second dwellings. The proposed draft amendments are also circulated for comment among internal departments and the St. Clair Region Conservation Authority. And the draft amendments will list the additional residential units as a permitted use within the applicable residential and agricultural zones and establish general provisions to private development. It will also include the addition, revision, or the replacement of several definitions to ensure alignment with the provincial legislation and provide clarity within the bylaw. Number of additional residential units permitted per lot will also be identified. Location and setback requirements, maximum size and height, lot coverage, servicing needs, parking, and applicable criteria. The purpose of the public meeting is to present the draft amendments for review and to provide an opportunity for members of the public and council to share their comments or concerns. Feedback gathered from both the public and council will help inform any necessary revisions before the final amendments are brought forward for council consideration at a future meeting. So the Planning Act was amended to permit as of right up to 3 residential units per property without requiring a rezoning application to permit them. However, the maximum size requirements, including lot coverage, height, and setbacks, are established by the town through its zoning regulations. The 3 residential unit mandate applies to any parcel of urban residential land, which is defined to mean a residential lot in an area of settlement that is serviced by municipal water and sewage services and contains a single detached, semi-detached, and townhouse dwelling.
Maria, do you have to advance the slide?
I do know. Oh, sorry. No, it's okay. Thank you. So the ARUs are defined as self-contained dwelling units with its own entrance, kitchen, living, sleeping, and bathroom facilities. They can be located, there's 2 options. So within the primary dwelling, you can have 2 additional residential units, or you can have 1 in the primary dwelling and 1 in a detached accessory building. These are some visual examples of what could be proposed as an additional residential unit. The visuals are helpful in providing some options of what's available. Like, a garage could be converted. You could have one above the garage. It could be in addition to the main dwelling. It could be a detached accessory building. There are some exclusions. The main ones are hazard lands, including legal non-conforming uses like homes on hazard lands, and plans of subdivision. Now, the proposed amendment does address some additional exclusions, which include in a cellar, lots in a mobile home park. And that's not the full list of exclusions that we can go through, but there are some additional ones that we've identified. Although not mandated in the Planning Act, the provincial planning statement from 2024 does provide support for ARUs on agricultural lands. It provides for the same up to 2 ARUs in addition to the primary farm dwelling, provided no more than 1 ARU is located in a detached structure. They have to be limited in scale and situated close to the primary dwelling or farm cluster, comply with MDS, and connected to proper private water and sanitary sewer services. So they could be on partial services as well. And then not hinder continued agricultural use. And this comes right out of the provincial planning statement. They cannot be severed and must remain part of the farm parcel containing the primary dwelling. They are permitted in addition to farm worker housing. So these are some of the definitions that we're looking to either replace, add, or revise. So we're looking to replace the accessory second dwellings with the additional residential unit. The accessory second dwellings is part of an older piece of legislation that the zoning complied with, but now the additional residential unit regulations will be definition, and the regulations that pertain to second dwellings will be replaced with the ARUs. So we'll need to add a definition for the additional residential unit. So which we've already discussed, but we can go over again, is a separate and self-contained dwelling unit that is that's basically subordinate to the primary dwelling and located within the single detached. We define a dwelling unit to indicate that it's got an independent entrance from outside the building or from a common corridor inside the building, which allows for food preparation, eating, and living and sleeping. And then we're adding a definition for primary dwelling, which means the dwelling unit having the largest gross floor area located on the lot, and of which an ARU is part of. There are some sections in the zoning that refer to accessory second dwelling outside of the current section that relates to that. So we're looking to replace the references to accessory second dwellings where appropriate with ARUs. We will also be looking to update the list of permitted uses under the specific residential zones and the agricultural zones to list additional residential units. And this is really what is meant by the as of right by the province, is just to avoid having applicants apply to council to rezone the properties to allow for them because they currently are not listed as permitted uses. So this next section is going into more depth to what is being proposed in the general provisions. So this is where we discuss where it's permitted. We discuss the number, which we've already reviewed now, but in the general provisions, we'd like to provide this information as further direction for people so they know in terms of what they would like to see on their property, how it fits in with these provisions. In the residential and A3 zones, they need to be connected to full municipal water and sanitary services. The A3 zone in Wyoming is an area that there's only 2 areas that are zoned in Plympton-Wyoming as A3, and they are residential lots on full services. However, they have maintained the A3 zoning because they were not zoned that way. They would have the livestock facility that is across from these properties. Notwithstanding Table A, which Table A is not going to be revised, but this section is as it relates to the bills and regulations as related to the additional residential units, which stipulates that lots with ARUs shall be permitted up to a 45% total lot coverage. So this will supersede what is currently in the zoning when it speaks to lot coverage, but we felt that it was not something we needed to reflect specifically in the table because it only applies if there are ARUs on the lots. So we are proposing that the primary dwelling occupy a minimum of 55% of the building's total gross floor area where there is 1 ARU within or attached to the primary dwelling. Where there are 2 additional residential units within or attached to the primary dwelling, the proposal is that it occupy 50% of the total gross floor area. So we have here just reiterated some part of the definition for gross floor area. So it includes the total area of all floors, includes the basement, but it excludes the internal parking areas in terms of calculating percentage of gross floor area. There is in the Planning Act does allow for no more than 1 dedicated on-site parking space for each additional residential unit. So that is a maximum that we can require. However, if applicants wish to provide more than the 1, they are welcome to do so, but we are permitted to require only a maximum. And we are requiring that all units be addressed and that the municipal address displayed be on the 911 protocol. So some exclusions, home occupations are only going to be permitted in the primary dwelling. Can't be severed onto a separate lot. It has to be severed together with on the same lot as the primary dwelling. It can't be used as a short-term vacation rental. This complies with our official plan policy. And it's going to be prohibited in the plan of condominium, the mobile home park, cellar, any dwelling or detached accessory building that encroaches into very hazard area. And again, some additional exclusions depending on its encroachment in the EPL zone. We also added that it can't be on a lot that's used for a group home and the day nursery. The next section, it addresses in the general provision, it talks about access to the main entrance. That's to be directly from either the street via the primary dwellings driveway, or has to be a hardscape surface walkway with an unobstructed path of travel, which is a minimum of 1.2 meters in width and 3 meters in height. So we did have discussions with building services and fire about these proposed regulations as well. We're recommending that none of the ARUs be accessed by an unenclosed staircase in the front or exterior side yard. This is, to maintain the aesthetics, the streets from the streetscape, and also just the homes in general, their established residential character. We have determined that planning is satisfied that if are unenclosed in the interior or the rear yard, that the impacts will be more mitigated. But certainly, if we would like to not see staircases, unenclosed staircases in the front or exterior side. The entrance shall either be shared through the main entrance via internal corridor or be located on the side or rear wall of the primary dwelling, facing the interior side and rear wall. We've also indicated here that the detached accessory building comply with the existing sections of 3.3.3 and 3.3.4 when it's located in a residential area, and these sections relate to detached accessory buildings and structures. And in the A1 and A2 sections 3.3.3 and 3.3.5. And 3.8.1 also is subject to those provisions. In terms of in the A1, A2, or the A4 zones, we are asking that they be located in compliance with section 5.2 of the bylaw and minimum distance separation formula. The interior, the proposed minimum interior side and rear setbacks, we're proposing 2.4 meters, and the gross floor area in an agricultural area to be 112 square meters, which is approximately 1,200 square feet. So this means in a residential zone that the additional residential unit counts against the maximum permitted total lot coverage of all accessory buildings and structures per section 3.3.4. And what that section says, it's either 10%, it's either 10% up to a maximum of 93 square meters, which is approximately 1,001 square feet. Section 3.3.4B does not apply to an ARU in the residential zone. And the maximum height for the additional residential units we've stipulated as 5.5 meters in any residential zone, A3 and A4 zone, and 7 meters in the A1 and the A2 zone. The section 3.3.4B relates to, there are a number of regulations stipulated there that allows for the height of detached accessory buildings to be up to 5.5 meters. However, once you surpass like 3.5 or you get up to 4 meters, there's additional regulations there with respect to knee walls and second stories. And so we've just simplified that section because there will be additional comprehensive zoning bylaw amendments coming overall. So we're anticipating there will be changes there. So we're trying to capture these here as well. So again, for the detached additional residential units, we're continuing to request a minimum area of 1.2 meters that's open and unobstructed from the ground to the sky. And that needs to be maintained between the additional residential unit and the primary dwelling. We're also proposing that it not be located further than 20 meters from the primary dwelling. And that's just to keep a compact urban form in the residential area, also for more efficiency, for connection to municipal services. And in terms of the agricultural, it's just to ensure that it remains close to the farm cluster and that it's not taken away from the prime agricultural land. This is concluding the information on the proposed amendments. So I'm going to open it up to questions. So we're looking for feedback and comments, and then direction for staff to prepare a zoning bylaw amendment for council to consider at a future meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Casarasi, for that detailed report, and thank you for the visual. It certainly does help us. Before we go to questions from council, I have to go to presentation of correspondence received in response to the notice of proposed amendment. Council, I believe you have in front of you the piece of correspondence that came from Travis Bowman relating to this presentation and why we're here this evening. Clerk, have we received, or maybe I'm sorry, I should ask through you to our planning technician, have we received any further correspondence?
Your worship, nothing numbers today.
Okay. Good, thank you. Council, I'll give you, if you haven't read it, it's a good opportunity to read Mr. Boma's presentation to us. I will at this time open it up for any questions that council has to our planner. Councilor Bojan first.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a question about the parking requirements. So I know it says that the intention is to allow tandem parking. But I know for a fact, as soon as we allow tandem, I mean, if you have limited parking in your own household, it's hard to juggle cars. So I just anticipate that if we allow tandem parking for two ADUs or ADRs, ARUs, whatever the heck they are. And now you got two cars front to back. For someone who doesn't even live in your own house, I think they're just gonna park on the road. And we're trying to avoid that in a lot of places. So are we allowed to be more restrictive in our parking requirement and say tandem is not allowed? And you can't have tandem parking for two different units?
For your worship, the tandem parking is permitted. In terms of the legislation, it does identify that it would be permitted. So, we're trying to keep the parking. The reason that we are proposing to ask for the minimum, because there are municipalities who have chosen to waive the requirement for parking. We're asking for it to remain on site, the parking, so that it's not on the road.
Councilor.
Thank you. So I guess for clarity, are we allowed to say you have to have on-site parking? One per ARU, but it cannot be tandem? Are we allowed to be more restrictive than what the province is saying? I guess is my question.
We can double check that. We will double check that, but I'm fairly certain that it says the most you can ask for is one space per unit, and you must allow for tandem parking. We'll double check that.
Okay, I appreciate that, just because people are just gonna park on the road to avoid texting the upstairs tenant at 6 AM.
Yes, then we have no plows and then we have fire trucks.
And I do have one more question, Mr.
Yeah, sure.
Again. Will the county have to approve septic capacity if there's an ARU that's not in that zone that has to be a municipal?
Through your worship, that is correct. So we had initially, when we drafted the proposed amendments, we had actually put in a regulation that it comply with OBC and any other health and safety regulations. But those regulations stand as they are when someone needs to go for a building permit. They will need to ensure that they meet all the OBC requirements. And so we felt that was, we initially had it in there. We previously have had those additional regulations. They are more information for applicants who are looking to apply for these types of projects and developments. But we chose to keep it up because that OBC will still be a requirement.
Other than that, just thanks for the presentation.
Thank you. Councilor Vacy?
Yes, thank you. I don't know if this is for planning or for the fire, but with ARUs inside the same building, are we gonna have interconnected alarms mandatory? And second, that we're allowing one to be 1.2 meters from the main structure. Again, comes to fire, if I build anything that close to my house, I have to have fire retardant, everything to keep it from burning down. So is that gonna be? Because I would think would need to be mandatory on both. Right, because if you're building a structure beside the house, I have to get the special drywall and all that other kind of stuff, or a firewall of some sort. But there's no mention of any of that.
Chief Davidson?
So normally that would be covered through building services as far as separations to other dwellings, including this. I'm not sure how we're going to address the additions of interconnected alarms with this. It will depend upon, when they were built and if they fall into retrofit, say.
No, I think it's a good point for consideration. And Irene?
So the province interestingly, put in a provision that said that, and I say interestingly because of all the things that they chose to regulate and not regulate about ADUs. They chose to put in a provision that says an ADU must be 4 meters away from the main unit unless the municipality specifies otherwise. And so we already have a provision that says a detached building must be 1.2 meters free and clear from the main unit. So that means not just wall to wall, but eaves to eaves, 1.2 meters free and clear. So we put that provision in there just more as to flag it. It's already a requirement under the detached building requirements. If council wants it to be more than 1.2 meters, more than what we currently apply to accessory building, we can certainly do that. Just tell us what it should be or investigate further with the building and fire. But our thinking was to just keep using that current standard that we have for attached accessory buildings.
Ms. Casarasi?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to return to the question Councillor had. So it is in the Ontario Regulation 299 of 2019. It does stipulate that a parking space that is provided and maintained for the sole use of the applicant of an additional residential unit may be a tandem parking space.
That's unfortunate.
This is may, but then it doesn't say shall, which doesn't mean we cannot be more restrictive. So that just says it may be. But legislation, when it says may, doesn't mean that you shall. So we'll have to probably clarify.
So through Your Worship, once the planning act stipulates that there is an option for it, we cannot make it more restrictive.
So the act's a little different in that sense. Thank you.
Should Irene?
I think the word may is that it's not mandatory to the homeowner. The homeowner has the option between tandem and non-tandem. I think that's the intent of that word. If it were shall, then the homeowner must use tandem spaces.
Anything else, Councillor Baker? Okay, Councillor Rodriguez?
Thank you. Said a couple things, but I did briefly, kind of ask a little bit before. There were two things. One was the changes to minor variances as of right. And I believe, Will knew more about what I was talking about on that than I did. So, and how it would affect. And how it would affect this. Or the side yard setbacks. Change coming.
Would you like me to speak to that? Through you, Mr. Mayor. So there's legislation passed and it's been some time since I've reviewed it, so I'm just going from memory. The legislation is basically as of right minor variances. So that legislation has been passed. And what it says is prescribed list of variances are allowed in automatic minor variance. And so although the legislation has been passed, it doesn't mean anything till there's an actual regulation that says these are the variances that are allowed minor variances automatically. But I expect it would be things like a front yard setback. So if your front yard setback requirement is 6 meters, then once the regulation is passing, front yards are variances subject to automatic minor variances. Your setback is actually only 5.4 meters as of right. So people are saying, what do we do with this? Do we update our zoning bylaws now to say that our front yard setback is 5.4 meters? Well, no, because now it's automatically 54 centimeters less than that. So I think it's a dumb thing, because some municipalities are saying, okay, well, do we make it now 6.7 so that it's 6 at the end, So anyways, it's not a problem that relates to ADUs. It's a problem that relates to everything in our zoning bylaw, and we don't know yet what those provisions are going to be subject to that automatic minor variance. I think it's entirely possible that that regulation never gets passed, because they're going to figure out that people are just going to start upping their requirements so that they automatically become less. And if the setback should be 6 meters, make it 6 meters. If it should be 5, make it 5. But anyway, so that's the discussion that we were having earlier with respect to that legislative change.
Thank you. Yes.
And thank you for that clarification, because we really didn't get to the clarifying part, just the questions. So the second question related to regulation 462 of 24, where they have changed the definition of primary residential unit. Now it's where the house is situated on a parcel of land containing an additional residential unit. And it also speaks to instead of gross floor area, it's now based on some lot coverage, if I'm saying that right. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the provisions that was put into the legislation for where ADUs are mandatory was that when you have an ADU, your permitted lot coverage is automatically 45%. So you might have a new subdivision that you just designed for 35% lot coverage with your stormwater management calculations and all that. But the second somebody has 1 or 2 ADUs, they're now allowed to have 45% lot coverage. So we looked at that fairly closely. The legislation says you cannot set a minimum size for an ADU. It doesn't say you can't set a maximum. And so that 45% isn't saying that you can build an ADU that fills you right up to now to 45%. But what it's saying is you have to allow 45% lot coverage to help facilitate the ADUs. You can still, it's our opinion, you can still put a maximum on the ADU, right? So the ADU might be 10%, the house might be 35%, but your ADU can't go more than the maximum that you set. So we put in some maximums. We basically said that you still have to meet the maximum lot coverage provisions for your accessory buildings that are already in the zoning bylaw. If it's a detached building, if it's an attached building, we've put in some maximums as to what percentage of the house, the overall structure's floor area can make up. And so our desire is that where there are ADUs, there be clearly a primary unit. So we know the legislation doesn't necessarily use that language, but from a planning perspective, we think it's a good idea there to be an obviously primary unit. And then based on the floor area that it occupies in the house. And whereas your zoning bylaw currently, I believe, allows no more than 30% for the ADU to make up 30%, if I'm correct about that. Yeah. We're actually saying up to 45%. So they could be fairly close. So it's a big departure from what we currently have and have done in the past. And it's, we think, quite a generous proportion of the building that could be an ADU.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I just want to be clear on the answer. So it's up to 35% of the primary square footage, so it's subordinate to that? Is that what you're saying versus the land covered?
So just not to get confused about numbers. 30% I said was, I think, what we currently have, right? So, but what we are suggesting we go to would be if you have one ADU in the house, the primary unit must occupy 55% or more of the building. So the ADU could occupy up to 45%. If you have two ADUs within the building, the primary unit must occupy up to 50%, at least 50% of the house. So the other 50% could be split however you want between those other two ADUs. That's the recommendation. So we looked at some numbers. We kind of threw in some hypothetical situations. What if the main unit is this many square feet? What would that make for the ADU? We came up with some things that we think would actually be workable for people and reasonable in terms of maintaining some character, some residential integrity in our neighborhoods. And so we're open to talking further about those things, but we think the general approach and the numbers that we've come up with should work well.
Through your worship, I just wanted to also add, so when we were looking at that, we were looking at a number of different scenarios. We were just not looking at conversion of existing building, existing space in the primary dwelling. We were also looking at if it was an addition that was put on the house as well. So those numbers yielded obviously different ratios. So we tried to look at different scenarios to try to inject some flexibility into the regulations to allow for this type of development, but in an organized fashion.
Thank you. Deputy?
Yeah, excuse me, I don't know what's the matter. Anyway, if you're building an additional residential unit, freestanding, does it have to be connected? It has to be connected to full services. Can it be connected to the existing house though, for full services? And what if it's on a septic system?
So through your worship, yes, the standalone needs to be connected to the servicing that's already connected to the house. There is not going to be, the recommendation is not that separate connection be established for the additional residential unit. The additional residential unit is part of that parcel. It is not meant to be created or established in such a way that it would be separate from.
Could that ADU be connected to the main services?
Understanding from through your worship. So my understanding from Public Works is that yes, that would be
With the exception of water, because it would have to be after the water meter. So they're
Couldn't
gonna
have its own separate water meter.
our current pulses, no.
Okay,
Anything else, Deputy?
no, that's it, thanks.
Okay, Councilor Van Claveren?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will say that discussing ARUs and ADUs with ADHD is a bit of a trouble. So bit okay then, that if you have an existing residence and you add one or more ARUs and they're all to be long-term rentals, is that okay?
your worship. Yes, it is. The legislation is not set up to prescribe who you would be renting it to. So it is meant, the intent of the amended changes to the legislation and the zoning is that it is for long-term rental. It is specifically not meant for short-term rentals. But we have that policy direction in our official plan already, but it is meant to be to increase the supply of housing and to provide affordable options, especially given the demographics and
Thank you. Well, I might expand on that, Mr. Mayor. In regards to short-term rentals, if it is a owner occupied residence, Would it, under our new policy, be okay then to have a short-term rental? As a secondary ARU?
So the additional residential unit is not meant to be for short-term vacation rentals, so it would not comply with the policies and the regulations.
Maybe one more question, please.
Sure.
I'm thinking something like, I'm not sure if we have a number of pets bylaw in effect per property. Is that something that is written into this report at all about? Is often each household would have its own standard household items like pets, garbage containers, like blue box, things like that. Things get cluttered, do things get a little busy at the roadside? And I'm curious about separate meters, if they have also or necessary.
Irene?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, some of these questions about sewer connections, water connections, water meters, kennel licenses, things like this. Those things are going to be regulated by Ontario Building Code and by your sewer connection bylaws and by your animal control bylaws, right? There may be things that you find, you know, if there's a big uptake on ADUs and it creates some of these issues, you might have to adjust some of your other bylaws to address that as time goes by.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Willett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find this a very interesting topic that after spending years here trying to regulate short-term rentals, a lot of the stuff that was discussed here tonight, like more garbage pails, more recycle bins, all that kind of stuff. And now we're going to allow 3 residents on one piece of residential property in a residential neighborhood. And you know, it just sparks all kinds of questions. I mean, you get into this parking, you know, you allow 1 vehicle. Well, most households nowadays have 2 vehicles. You know, they both work, 2 vehicles. So, like I said, it sparks a whole lot of questions. And does it make sense that we need more housing? Absolutely. But like I say, with all the issues we had for short-term rentals, now we're going into the same neighborhoods, and now we're going to put 3 residents on each piece of property. I don't know how much of that there's gonna be, like, but who knows, right? So all these questions here tonight are all very legitimate. You right down to the animals and stuff like, yeah, now you're gonna have, that person had 2 dogs, now you're gonna have 6 dogs and 10 cats. And anyways, what more can I say? This is a provincial legislation. It's brought down upon us and we have to deal with it. But does it make sense? I don't think it does in residential neighborhoods. I just don't see it, especially when we're going after the short-term rental people that are trying to pay their taxes. And, you know, we restrict them, and yet these other places, as long as it's 30 days or more, they can rent it out. You call it an additional. They're like, yeah, anyways, all I got to say.
All right, thank you, Councilor. I have one question. You talked about the address. I believe Councilor Rossi's in your report of something about they have to have a separate address, can't be dovetailed onto the existing one. They'd have to have their own 911 number. Is that correct? Was that?
So we've put in a regulation there just that it comply with the county of Lambton 911 protocol. So that protocol will indicate whether it needs a green 911 sign out front, or if it's just, for example, adding like 323A, 323B. So just that it comply with the current standard that we have in place.
All right. So now we go to questions from members of the public, and I believe Dennis and Chantel Roach are possibly online with us. Dennis or Chantel, do you have any questions or any comments you'd like to?
Hello. Good evening. Yes, thank you, Your Worship. We do have a couple questions. I believe the main question you have, or we had, Travis, I'll disclose actually we're the clients that Travis refers to in the letter you received, I believe.
Yes. Mhm.
And I know he's spoken quite a bit in the letter regarding the potential looking at maybe changing the overall limit to the ARU. The situation for those that potentially haven't even used, we'll say 5% of their property, already have an accessory dwelling, it's going to be very difficult to consider a detached ARU with a limit of that 1,000 square feet. So in addition to that, I know that Travis addressed that in the letter. We were just wondering if that's something that might be on the table for consideration to possibly case by case when you have already an accessory dwelling on the property per se.
A detached garage, for example.
Because it does really limit what size you can build an ARU to.
Okay, Ms. Costa Rossi, you want to take this one?
Yes, through your worship. So we've tried to, in drafting the proposed amendments, we've tried to be as flexible as possible. There will be cases where a request may not be able to meet all of the regulations as proposed. So there is an option that the applicants can move forward with a minor variance request. But as much as we've tried to be as comprehensive as possible with the proposed recommendations and changes, that would be an alternate route for someone to seek on a case-by-case basis.
Mr. Iweenie?
One of the things Mr. Bauman mentioned in his, suggested was, what if a property had an ARU? Would it then make sense to allow them to have more accessory lot coverage? If, for instance, if they already have a detached garage, would they not be able to go over that 1,000 square feet or to allow an ARU? And it's not a bad suggestion. But I think it's important for council to realize that you have an official plan policy that talks about ARUs. That specifically says, and Maria, correct me if I don't, I'm kind of paraphrasing. The gist of it is that having an ARU is not reason to be allowed greater lot coverage than what you're otherwise allowed. And so the implication is, if somebody were to use the full 1,000 square feet for their ARU, they wouldn't be allowed to have a detached garage or a detached accessory building. Or if they already have a detached accessory building, potential size of the detached ARU would be reduced by whatever the size of that building is. And that is because of an official plan policy that is in your current official plan.
And through your worship, in this particular case, a full assessment was done in terms of the official plan policies and the current regulations, and some alternative options were provided. This application is coming back to committee shortly, but there were some alternatives that were provided as options. But when we're looking at this type of application, we're trying to ensure not only compliance, but also that it fits in to the area itself with character, and that there isn't an overdevelopment of the site. But certainly the official plan policy as it relates to detached residential units clearly stipulates that it is secondary to the primary use on the property, and that the size in and of itself doesn't justify, because it's an ARU, the increased size isn't justified on that basis.
So Ms. Roach, does that answer your question? And do you have any further questions, either you or Mr. Roach?
Yes, thank you, your worship. I guess we were just looking for clarification for those that have a property that is a little bit larger than an average residential. We're not even using 5% for the exterior dwellings. I guess, which is part of the issue we're not quite understanding, is we haven't even reached our 10% because we're capped at that 1,000. We're using approximately 5% of our property. So we do have a larger residential area, which I guess is part of the issue we're having, is why can't we sort of go beyond that? But with that aside as well, and I know that Travis will probably be speaking more on this later with Maria anyway, so I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I guess regarding the general, I just have one question regarding the general provisions. You speak of the percentage of the GFA. There's no number in there regarding a detached, and I'm just curious what that number might be.
Okay, Ms. Conservancy?
So through your worship, I just want to mention two things. So in terms of each property that is assessed in, if it's a minor variance application, we do look at, we look at the specific, property in and of itself. So we look at not only what it's zoned as, but we look at certain features, if there's a drain or if there's a flood hazard on the property. So just want to mention that each property, when we're looking at it on a case by case, it has certain elements attached to it. And this property specifically is in a floodplain area. So there are some limitations in terms of development for more than perhaps the percentage that it's currently developed at. But as to address the other point, Chantal, could you just repeat that clarification that you were looking for on your last point?
Yeah, just
Did I
when you
address it correctly?
Yes, of course. So under the general provisions, it's outlined regarding the numbers, the percentages for the GFA. It talks about the gross floor for the attached or within, but it doesn't outline any numbers for an exterior detached.
So through your worship. Yep. So the way the general provisions were drafted with respect to that, it refers back to section 3.3.4. So it would be 10% or up to a maximum of 93 square meters, which is 1,001 square feet. But that maximum is additional residential unit if it's a detached that counts towards that 93 square meter maximum.
No, I guess I mean, you said that the current bylaw is sitting at 30%, correct? Am I understanding that for the GFA?
Yes.
So I guess my question is, it says 55% of the building's total gross floor for those within or attached to the primary dwelling. But if there are two, it goes down to 50. But it doesn't state if it's a detached, what that percentage of GFA must be.
So there's a separate section in the detached provisions. There are 3.8.2, and it refers to the detached accessory building complying in the residential area with 3.3.3 and 3.3.4, which is where it's stipulated that the maximum for all detached accessory buildings and structures is either 10% or up to a maximum of 93 square meters.
Okay.
Mr. Nyweeding?
So the answer is there is no restriction on the ADU size when it's detached as it relates to a percentage of the dwelling. It's just maximum 1,000 square feet of detached accessory coverage, and you can use that all for the ADU or part for ADU and part for sheds and things, regardless of what the size of the house might be.
So through your worship, the reason we chose to go this way is that the previous regulations as it related to accessory second dwellings did stipulate a 30% cap on 30% of the gross floor area of the main dwelling, but we've removed that for the detached additional residential unit so that you didn't have to have a percentage. So it was just to allow for the same maximum for all detached accessory buildings and structures. But the proposed additional residential unit is that square footage or square meters counts towards the maximum that's in section 3.3.4.
But Chantal, do you have another question? Because I have one that's coming up from council, but Ms. Rodriguez, can you hold on to that as we go to the next section? Now you'll be able to ask that question. Okay.
Just to clarify what they were talking about.
Just hang on. Chantal, anything else from you?
No, I think we're good. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. We have another member of the public here. Do you have a question that you'd like to ask? Just identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Malia Gossett. I live out in Blue Point. I have a couple of questions. Thank you. First of all, when you were first introducing the bylaw and the changes made, you identified that it would be applicable to all residential zones. But then I kind of got the flavor that maybe not all residential zones would have this wording added to it. So I'll be very specific. EPLs are residential zone. Is this going to be written into that particular zone, like, you know, allowance for ARUs, et cetera?
So through your worship, there are some exclusions in the EPL and it will depend on where that's being proposed, but in hazard areas, it is excluded.
Okay, I consider hazardous areas separate zoning. I don't know if I'm correct on that, so I'm not going to use that language. I'm just going to stay very specific to EPLs, which are environmentally protected lake shores, which are also residential zones. So I'm just very interested to know, will this language be written into that particular residential zone, or is it going to be an excluded residential zone?
So through your worship. So currently we are proposing that any dwelling or detached accessory building that encroaches into the primary hazard area portion of an EPL zone, that ARUs be excluded from there. And also any dwelling or detached accessory building that encroaches into the secondary hazard area of an EPL zone or into a natural hazard area regulated by the St. Clair Region Conservation Authority. Those not be permitted there. So we would have to assess.
That would be like a variance request, or?
So these areas also require permits from the St. Clair Region Conservation Authority. So it's a multi approach in terms of reviews that are conducted. We normally recommend that if there's any development in the EPL, that applicants first contact the St. Clair Region Conservation Authority to provide them with additional direction and determine if what they're proposing is supportable on the basis of their regulations. Because if it's not permitted by the St. Clair Region Conservation Authority, then planning is unable to support it because that area is regulated.
Okay, and thanks for that clarification. I guess my question would be, we're not the only municipality that has conservation authority, I'm not going to say protected, but kind of quasi-governed lands. And we're talking about incorporating a provincial, updating our bylaws to allow for a provincial direction. So what's happening elsewhere in the province with respect to these bordering conservation authority protected lands regarding ARUs?
Hello, through the mayor. So EPL zones, technically they meet the definition of an urban parcel of land under the provincial legislation. That legislation, section 35.1 of the act says on any urban parcel of land, you must allow up to 3 units. So zoning bylaw that purports to prohibit ADUs on an urban parcel of land is not effective. But section 35.1 of the Planning Act does not supersede conservation authority permits. So what we've done here is we've said, we've contacted the conservation authority and said, like, what are you going to allow in these areas? So in the EPL zone, you have a primary hazard area, which is those areas that are within that 3-to-1 slope of the toe. And then you have the rest of the area. So in the rest of the area, the conservation authority said, let us look at it. We might be okay with it. We might allow it. Within that primary slope, we're never going to allow it. So what we've done reflects that. It says if you get a permit from the conservation authority, you can build in that other area. You can't build in the 3-to-1 slope. So we're actually putting in zoning that doesn't apply, that we don't have the authority to prohibit them. But what we're doing is we're reflecting what the Conservation Authority is gonna allow through their permitting process. So technically, we shouldn't be doing that, but we're just trying to be helpful in pointing people to what, not putting them to the Conservation Authority when there's really no hope that they're gonna get that permit from them. So you caught us there a little bit, but we did that to try to work together with the Conservation Authority and reflect that other legislation that is not superseded by the section 35.1 of the act. I hope that wasn't too confusing, but
Thank you.
yeah.
That was good. So there, that zoning is not excluded, but what you're saying is there's a little bit of a dance.
It's you need, if you can get the Conservation Authority permit, you're off to the races.
Your worship, we have had another application where the official plan said no in the hazard area, but we have recommended that the applicant speak to the Conservation Authority about their proposal. And the Conservation Authority has said that it's possible for the development to proceed. Obviously, there's conditions associated with getting a permit from them. But if the Conservation Authority had come back to us and said no, then that's their regulated area. And if you're not able to get a permit from them, then a building would not qualify and meet the criteria to get a building permit.
Thank you. Sorry,
One more.
I do. I have another one. Taxes, you identified that this would be like this would be a 911 municipal address. So what are the tax implications, I guess, then? Will they be separately assessed? Will the taxes of the primary be increased?
Mr. Sabansky?
So, our treasurer was not invited today, but I'll take this one to the best of my ability. Taxes are assessed by impact. They're assessed per parcel of land. So since an accessory dwelling unit exists within an existing parcel of land, it will not be getting a separate tax bill because it's taxed for the parcel of land. However, MPAC also watches building permits. And because MPAC will recognize the fact that this property has an ARU on it, which theoretically could greatly increase the the value of that property, they would likely see an increased tax bill because of the increased value, which means you pay at a higher rate because of the higher value.
Further?
No, thank you.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna go back. I'm sorry, Chantel and Dennis, anything else from you before we move on?
No, thank you, your worship, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, council, going back to the next one. Any further questions from council or members of the public? Councilor Rodriguez, you had something, then I'll go to Councilor Vaizey.
So I just want to go back to kind of my first question now that people up on the screen have spoken. It kind of maybe puts it more clear to me what we were talking about on that regulation 62 of 24, where they redefined the additional residential unit rather than a accessory unit. Whatever it was. There's so many terms out there. So basically you're stating that the county policies have these things as far as maximum lot coverage for accessory buildings. So you're kind of putting these additional residential units into that same descriptive you already have it in policies. Is that kind of what's happening there? Because they're saying they only have about 5% of utilizing about 5 to 10% of their maximum 45, or technically 30, but could be 45 with an additional residential of lot coverage for accessory buildings. But you're containing it to 1,000 square feet because based on policy definitions that you were kind of following on accessory buildings versus additional residential units. So there's nothing defined for I'm just trying to, where you came up with this.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So it's your zoning bylaw. So the provincial legislation says you must allow up to 3 units per property, one of which could be in a detached building. And it says, other than X, Y, and Z, municipal zoning bylaws continue to apply. So your municipal zoning bylaw right now says, your accessory building lot coverage, all buildings combined, can't be more than 1,000 square feet, can't be more than 10% lot coverage, whichever is more restrictive. So the provincial legislation, while it says, yes, you can have a detached ERU, in theory, you still have to comply with the local zoning bylaw in terms of accessory building lot coverage maximums. So currently, your zoning bylaw says no more than 1,000 square feet. And in this particular situation, and I've never been to the property, I don't know all the details of that situation, but in that situation, 1,000 square feet is the maximum, the operable maximum. So that's governing the situation today, right? Because the way the provincial legislation and the local zoning bylaw interact. What we're talking about in terms of how we would suggest amending the zoning bylaw, we're suggesting sticking with that 1,000 square foot maximum for accessory buildings.
But the provincial legislation allows flexibility, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, your zoning bylaw, you could say we're gonna allow 8,000 square foot accessory buildings. Your zoning bylaw, in theory, but the provincial legislation does not supersede local zoning bylaws to the extent that it would require you to increase your accessory building lot coverage more than it already is. It says you have to allow 35% lot coverage as a whole. It doesn't say all of that has to be, you have to allow that to be all accessory buildings or ADUs. You can still, within that 45%, set a maximum on what proportion of that the ADU can be. You know, that it could be 5% for the ADU and 40% for the main house or something like that. So again, that was something that we looked at a little bit closely in terms of the language and how other municipalities are interpreting and applying that. And we're quite comfortable that you don't have, if your house is, say, 25% of the lot, you don't have to allow an ADU of 20% of the lot or something. That 45% is not forcing that on you, a detached building.
Councilor Basie?
Yes, thank you. I'm going back to the tax thing, because this is what we started with months ago. Was you got people now living on the lot, using all our infrastructure, putting a strain on our roads, more garbage, fire department, and everything else. And yet the potential for no tax increase.
No, there would absolutely be a tax increase. You have to, unless they do.
If somebody were to catch it, somebody were to do.
They have to get a building permit to create a secondary dwelling unit. Those building permits are all submitted to MPAC, where the increased value would be by MPAC. So it's the only way there wouldn't be a tax increase if someone did the work without a building permit.
What if it's not deemed to enhance your property value? I look at it the other way, that it would diminish my property value, because how am I gonna sell the damn thing with 3 houses on it? Unless it's somebody that wants one, like buying a rental unit, that not everybody wants a rental unit. So this whole legislation takes into no consideration of the fact that we're adding more people onto our sewers, roads, or everything else. We're just gonna have to live with it. And then we're gonna have to pay to upgrade the sewage. Gonna have to upgrade the water lines because they're not big enough anymore, because now we've got, it's the stupidest legislation I've ever seen. You can quote me on that.
She already has. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, just to kind of go on that point too, when I raised the question about municipal taxes, I figured the brunt would be borne by the existing property owner. However, when you talked about municipal addressing, you're creating like a separate entity, kind of like, even though it's not to be severed, but my understanding is with municipal addressing, 911 addressing, you get into bigger things like servicing telecommunications and postal service and taxes. So, you know, if it's to be recognized as a municipal address, then it does kind of separate it, and therefore would there be a separate tax structure for it? Like, and I don't know what's happening elsewhere in the province, like where this exists, but
From a legal land perspective, it does not separate the property.
so then maybe it won't have a separate municipal 911 service address then, is I guess my,
Under the county's legislation, you can have multiple addresses on a property. But
Okay.
MPAC assesses per parcel of land, not for what's on the land individually.
I'm sorry, I'm just speaking from past experience in network services and other government services. Municipal address means everything in terms of a service address. So if you're giving it a municipal address, you're giving it an identity, a unique identity to the property, where the taxes may flow only to the property owner. You know, I just, that's why I was curious about the questions, other services.
Through your worship.
Yes.
So one of the main reasons for the addressing is that, you know, emergency services and postal services, they need to know where to go. So that is to why we are recommending that it be municipally addressed, but it does need to comply with the 911 in place for the county. So it could just be like A, B, you know, 523A, 523B, but it is an identifier that needs to be recorded so that services know where to go. And even when it comes to, in terms of the taxation question as well, in majority of municipalities where we reviewed information, they actually address that question in the same manner. And there is a potential for there to be increased taxes, but it would be to the main property owner that those taxes would be directed to, and the assessment, as the CEO mentioned, would be done through MPAC.
I left any further questions? Councillor Wolvett?
If somebody's applying for these changes to have these 3 units on their property and is being denied for whatever reason, is this appealable to the OLT? Is it an appealable process or not?
Worship. So yes, if it's a planning application that's brought forth by someone, they do have appeal rights.
You do have an appeal process? Okay. The reason I asked that question, because several times I've heard you say tonight that we looked at this, we thought this might be better. I think at one point or a couple of points there, you said, you know what the legislation is, but you thought, what I'm trying to get at here, things are appealable when we get to the OLT. I don't think that kind of thing stands. What's the legislation or what isn't the legislation? See, I've seen these things before, and you can stand up in front and say, we thought this might be better. You know, that don't usually fly with an appeal process. So, and it sounds like to me tonight, wow, I mean, this is big stuff and a lot of questions to be asked, but a lot of it doesn't make sense whatsoever, especially when you talk about the taxes. All this stuff is going to cost money. 3 people living in one location, that means triple of everything. One family living there. So I think there's got to be a lot more questions asked about the cost of this to the municipality, not to the taxpayers, but to the municipality, and how we're going to get our money back. Because like Basie said, the usage of sewers.
Wow.
That's quite a promotion.
Use of sewers and stuff like that. It's all a cost and hasn't been addressed whatsoever. Anyways, I think there's gonna be more to this. Then, yeah, this is what it is and you have to accept it.
Oh, so through your worship, the legislation permits, as of right, ARUs. So a total of 3 per lot within the criteria that we've discussed this evening. the other issues that have been brought up in terms of garbage collection and taxes and servicing. And even about the animal control, those are all separate bylaws that the municipality implements, or, you know, if they feel that that needs to change down the road, that might be something to explore.
Although under municipal taxes, the property does not become individual dwelling units, we can bill for the extra garbage pickup. So they would pay for their garbage pickup. So that's one thing. Development charges are changing constantly. They're still changing. Council will be receiving a presentation from Lisa at BM Ross, who will be updating our development charges bylaw this winter. And she should be able to give you a lot more information on how development charges are used. So those are questions that might be best left for her when we have that presentation next month. So.
Anything else, Councilor Walker?
That's all, thanks. That's up to.
Mr. Nyweeding.
Mr. Mayor, just in response to Councilor Wolf's comments, I just want to emphasize. We used discretion in what we thought was best practice and what was appropriate for our residential areas within the bounds of what we were allowed under the legislation. So with the exception of what was pointed out with respect to the EPL zone, everything is working within is on side, in our opinion, is on side with the legislation and working within those parameters. And again, the EPL was because we did not want to suggest to people that they can do something that isn't allowed under other legislation. So yes, we're purporting to do something we can't do, but it's reflecting what others are doing in their legislation, which we thought was going to be more forthright and helpful to people in that when they're looking at zoning provisions and trying to figure out what I can and can't do on my property.
Anything else to my left? Ben Clever, anything? Sir, Deputy? Okay, well, before we move along, I want to thank our planning team for the work that you've done. This is a lot of work. It's a lot for us to consider. I think we've had some good discussions, some good comments have come back. Well, obviously, if council has some thoughts or further questions, I know our planning team is available to take a look at that and certainly respond to you. So we'll wait to hear back on a further presentation from you. I have a motion by Councilor Wolbett, seconded by Councilor Van Claver, that the report prepared by Maria Casarasi, Senior Planner, dated September 22nd, 2025, concerning the draft housekeeping amendment to the town zoning bylaw 97, 2003, related to additional residential units, be received, and staff be directed to bring forward an amending bylaw to council reflecting the recommendations contained in this report. Council, all those in favor? It's carried. And I have a motion by Councilor Bojan, seconded by Councilor Basie. Has a public meeting be adjourned? All those in favor? That is carried. Those that are joining with us virtually, we thank you very much. This meeting is now over. Thank you.